In a world brimming with challenges and change, with crises all around us, we need ideas, innovation, and inspiration. Welcome to the Free Market Roadshow 2024, where the pulse of contemporary discussions beats.
Today, you will have the opportunity to hear from a variety of experts who will share their insights and perspectives on free market economics, which will highlight its importance post-COVID world that is rife with government interventionism. As is customary, we will start with two welcoming speeches. I first kindly ask Mr. Stjepo Bartulica of Center za obnovu kulture, the main organizer of Free Market Roadshow in Croatia, to address the audience. Thank you.
Dragi prijatelji, studenti, dame I gospodo, ladies and gentlemen, I'll switch to English. It's my honor to welcome you to this year's Free Market Roadshow, hosted by the Center for Renewal of Culture, COC, and the Zagreb School of Economics and Management. We've been hosting these events since 2009, so we've been loyal partners. Hopefully, our free market ideas have been moving forward in Croatia. It's a difficult fight. We have to persevere because these ideas don't take hold overnight. And I'm sure as students you realize how important ideas are. There was a book written by Richard Weaver in 1949 called Ideas Have Consequences. Ideas Have Consequences. It was recently translated and published in Croatian by Verbum. Ideje imaju posljedice. I would highly recommend this book to all of you. And Weaver made a strong case of and explained how Western civilization had collapsed into two world wars during the 20th century. And indeed, we must learn from history. We know what works. There's plenty of empirical evidence showing that socialism leads to poverty. Despite what some politicians in Croatia may claim, especially on the left, that the role of government is essential and must actually be stronger in society in this day of so-called neoliberal capitalism, the evidence is strongly on the side of free markets and economic freedom. We at the Center for Renewal of Culture take this very seriously. Of course, culture comes first. We need a strong, family-friendly culture as a basis for a free market economy. Nothing works if our culture is in decline. But when it comes to economics, and this is something I think we need to stress, Croatia could be doing much better. When we hear the word stabilnost, stability, it's actually a word that disguises the stagnation, economic stagnation that we've been experiencing over the last several years. And as a result of this, many of you who finish university are looking for opportunities elsewhere. We want to change that. We want Croatia to be a place where you can make money, you can run a business. The rules should be transparent. We don't see the government as a player in the economy, but more as an unbiased referee. We need rule of law, obviously, and it's difficult. I always mention the legacy of communism. We shouldn't underestimate the fact that Croatia was run and ruled by people following deeply flawed ideas. And this legacy is very deep. And one of the reasons our center was founded in 2009 is to form future leaders and to offer you events like this where you will hear about authors and about ideas perhaps that you're not hearing in your courses. I am a friend of Mato Njavro, and I think Zashem is perhaps an example of how free markets actually work in the field of education. I'm not a big fan of public education myself. Coming from the United States, we see what's happened in the public education system, and it's not an over-exaggeration to say that it's a disaster. My younger brother, who's a doctor and has 5 kids, is homeschooling his children because he has no confidence in the school system in the United States. So again, ideas have consequences. I'm looking forward to this event and our panels, and I want to welcome our speakers who are here on the roadshow. Thank you for making the Zagreb stop. We hope you feel welcome, and we're grateful that you took time to visit us. Barbara Colm, who has been our partner from the beginning from Vienna, is coming later for the second panel. She should be arriving. So in conclusion, I myself was not so personally involved in this year's event because I was running for re-election, and I'm happy to say that I succeeded. So I'm again going to be serving the Croatian people in the parliament. But I want to extend a special thanks to our secretary, Mate Ćurić, for his work in preparing this event. It's not an easy endeavor. We have only volunteers working at our small think tank, but it's a group of committed people who believe in this cause. I also want to say a special extended greeting to my friend Nenad Bakić, who's here in the audience. Nenad has done great work in the public space here in Croatia, in the public square, promoting these ideas and fighting the socialist legacy which runs very deep in Croatia. And we need allies. There's many people who perhaps agree with us, but they prefer to stay under the surface, so to speak, invisible. Nenad is someone who is publicly advocating for changes in Croatia, and we're happy that he's here in the audience. So thank you again, and the students, I encourage you to stay till the end. We've invested a lot of time in preparing this. This is, I think, a unique opportunity for you to hear from people who have vast experience around the globe dealing with these economic questions. So again, thank you to Zeshem for being our partner this year, and I look forward to a great event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bartulica, for your kind words. I now ask Mr. Zoran Barac, director of the school, to address the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear participants, welcome to Zagreb School of Economics and Management. I'm really glad that we are today hosting this event again because free market ideas are strongly embedded in our curriculum. Also, we consider that disseminating those ideas are a very important part of our public impact. So we do all that to prepare our students, to help them develop their skills, competencies, and the knowledge for the global labor market as it is stated in our mission. So in doing that, we are focused, we call it on the so-called 4 pillars, 4 strategic pillars. First, taking into account all those ideas, we are committed to our faculty development. So we are trying to attract faculty and trying to support the development of our faculty who have master's or doctoral degrees from the distinguished and reputable institutions around the world. That is very important to our students, that such faculty help them to develop their skills, knowledge, and competencies. Second, we are strongly committed to the quality. We are the first business school in Croatia that has been granted international accreditation. There is only 5% of business schools in the world that has such accreditation. And that helped us a lot in our internationalization efforts. Today, 25% of our student body is international, coming from more than 150 partner universities around the world. And finally, we are striving to create strong links with the business community. We are always trying to invite and attract industry professionals as the lecturers and the faculty in our school teaching our students. So events such as this is also very important for our school, which gives opportunity to our students to connect with so-called real life. So therefore, I'm really happy, I'm really glad that you are here today, and I wish you very interesting discussions, panels, and networking today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barac. I now kindly ask Mr. Mate Ćurić to give a few introductory remarks as a formal start of the Free Market Roadshow event.
Dear students, dear friends, dear fellow free marketeers, as Stjepo said, we started in 2009, so this is the 16th Free Market Roadshow in Zagreb. So we are among the first ones who started with Austrian Economic Center on this roadshow. So the presentations we shall hear today are from experts and practitioners in the public and the private sectors and in the academia. We shall be addressing the issues from all angles. The free market, as Hayek reminds us, and we should never forget it, is more than an economic concept. It is a description of a free and interdependent society. Whatever our jobs, or even if we have no jobs at all, and just rely on pensions or benefits to live on, we are all ultimately dependent on the market, on wealth creation. If the market operates well, we and the next generation can expect higher living standards. If it doesn't operate, we can expect not just poverty, but further steps along the road to serve them. Every age seems to come up with some new case as to why there is a better way forward than the free market. Nowadays, after communism and socialism have been totally discredited, we hear all sorts of new arguments based on justice or morality. So, we must remind people again and again of why the free market is the only way to combine liberty and prosperity. This does not mean, and it has never meant, that for a conservative as I am, everything in society or politics is to be decided by markets. We cannot in Croatia, for example, allow an unwelcome transformation of our country just because free movement of labor apparently requires it. Nations must not allow their identities to be put up for a sale to the highest bidder. The market is not a utopian concept. It is a means, not an end. That end is to allow human beings to flourish and prosper. A true free market is also opposed to monopoly, to corporatism, and to crony capitalism. When these things take over, along with the values of what is called globalism, they discredit markets and threaten freedom. Our speakers today are going to address both long-term and short-term issues in their addresses. Thank you very much.
Now I kindly ask Eamonn Butler, founding director of the Adam Smith Institute, to join us with a short presentation, Restraining Government.
Thank you. I see that there is, thank you very much, and it's good to be here. I see that there's an international dog show going on in this city. And I have seen some specimens, but this one I think would win every prize. Thank you very much indeed. My colleague Hannes Gissurarson, Professor Gissurarson, will talk more about the morality of the market process. But really perhaps he should have come first. But I think many of you probably know that markets obviously are moral in a way because they produce wealth and prosperity, and that's good. They in particular produce prosperity for the poorest people. The reforms of the world trading system since 1990 have meant that dollar-a-day poverty is pretty well abolished from the planet. And that can only be a good and a moral thing. And they promote equality. And of course, they depend on voluntary transactions rather than people being forced to do something that somebody on authority thinks that they should be doing. So they have a great deal of moral conviction and weight behind them, unlike the government. So what do you do to restrain governments? Well, we live in a very difficult time, actually, because we have suffered a number of very significant what you might call emergencies. We had a financial crisis, we've had the pandemic, we've had wars in Ukraine and elsewhere. And what tends to happen, as F.A. Hayek said, is that emergencies are an excuse for people in government to take on new powers, which may be necessary in the emergency to deal with that, but at the same time, those powers tend to linger. They don't, once people have got those powers, they don't tend to give them up, and so those powers remain on the statute book, and then people can use those for purposes, those powers for purposes that were not part of the original intention. As Milton Friedman said, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program, and that's true of emergency measures as well. I mean, you can think of many examples. In the United States, for example, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, it led to a Roosevelt government who introduced huge federal spending, vast building programs, infrastructure programs, but also federal commissions on this and that, trade and all the rest of it. Huge expansion of the welfare state, which America is still suffering from, quite frankly. In World War II, of course, we had rationing and conscription and a great increase in surveillance over the population. With the events of 9/11 in New York, America gave huge powers to its security and surveillance services and intelligence services. Now, these are all perhaps necessary in an emergency, but in normal life, I'm not so sure. And in 2008, after the banking crisis, the first thing that politicians did was produce more regulation on banks. So now we have such regulation that it is extremely expensive for people to participate with it. And that means that there is less competition in banking. And since there's less competition in banking, you're more likely to get huge banks. And if they fail, then it's a real disaster. If you have lots of small banks and one fails, well, you can deal with that. But if you have a few big ones and one fails, it's a disaster all round. So, and in the pandemic, of course, to take a last example, of course, we had lockdowns and governments taking on many powers that we didn't think you could actually take on in a free and liberal world. So governments tend to accumulate these powers, and what do you do about it? I think that the first thing you need to do is, if there's an emergency, you have to define it as an emergency and say this is an unusual situation. And if we take powers or give government our power, then it's only temporary. And you need to put an actual time limit on that and say, after this is over, those powers must be reversed. I think the second thing we must do is to make sure that we strengthen our democratic institutions. Things like free speech, which is under assault, particularly in the United States, United Kingdom, but elsewhere as well. And the accountability of government to parliaments, to give parliaments real authority. I mean, you take the European Union, and that doesn't happen. It is basically run by the bureaucrats and by the non-elected people. And I think a free media is particularly important. We must also promote constitutional reforms that limit those executive powers and install, as Hayek said, the rule of law, that even those who are making the laws are subject to the law. So everybody is under the same authority. And I think the last thing that we should do is to celebrate the benefits of civil society. All those churches and associations and clubs and societies and social movements, they have a real power to engage people. You know, that's what life is really about. It's not about doing something that somebody up in government says we ought to do. It's being part of the local community, and it's hugely productive. And you get diversity then, so different ideas coming up, different ways of doing things. We need to celebrate that and to strengthen it. It's easy to be pessimistic because government just seems to keep growing and it never seems to have a stop. But I am optimistic because I think recent advances across the planet in terms of democracy and the rule of law and creating prosperity through trade and commerce, these things are very powerful, and I think people want them. There's a yearning to have more freedom and more independence. And I think there's a greater understanding than there has been over many decades of Hayek's idea of the spontaneous order, that leave people on their own and they will work out ways to collaborate and cooperate with each other. They don't need to be told how to do it. They don't need orders to come down to tell them how to run their lives. They work it out between themselves. Now, that is a very moral way of acting, that we do it voluntarily, we cooperate and we collaborate together. And so I think there's a greater understanding of that now, especially in the young, who really want to be left alone. They don't want to be pushed around by politicians, and I must say I don't blame them. So I remain optimistic that we can produce not only a very vibrant market economy, but also a very moral one. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now I would kindly ask Glen Hodgson from Free Trade Europe to join us with a presentation, The Current European Context.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It's great to be here in Zagreb today, and thanks to all of you for coming out here to be able to listen to the presentations. For the next few minutes, I will set the scenes for the discussions that we're going to have afterwards by saying a little bit about the anti-business approach that's been taken by the EU institutions over the last 5 years, a little bit on the current focus on deciding on industrial policy, and also a little bit on sort of trade and labour policy in the European context, as well as how the European elections, which are coming up in June, the potential impact and the implications for this as well. To start with the anti-business approach of the EU institutions, for the past 5 years, we've been seeing the European Parliament and the Commission who have been taking a stance which has been undermining business and forcing them down a route of more bureaucracy, more red tape and unnecessary rules. And the goals of the green and digital transitions are wrongly set up as a result, and we're heading really in the wrong direction on this front, given that Europe's economic success and growth are suffering at the expense of this kind of virtue signaling which has become so popular. The sustainability and environmental measures currently mean costs with very few benefits, while also making EU businesses uncompetitive at the same time. In this regard, the EU Green Deal needs to be rethought, and also the consumers and companies alike have been afraid to speak up about some of these for fear of abandoning the current orthodoxy and for fear of being attacked or even shut down because of it. And when it comes to technology, the approach is just really about regulation and control rather than facilitation in far too many cases. We've seen it with the AI Act, platform economy issues, Digital Market Acts. And we really should be looking more about creating this environment for positive entrepreneurship, innovation, and research instead. And these are issues and areas where Croatia and Croatians are very much in the lead and can benefit from this. And when we come to look at sort of the industrial policy in Europe and the wrong direction we're taking here, the current approach of the European Union institutions is very much the focus on interference, on meddling, and also picking winners. And the common use of state aid is undermining the market forces, it's distorting the competition in Europe. And the argument that China and the US are doing this, therefore we should be able to follow the same suit, is something that should be turned against, because there's no right way to do a wrong thing, given that state money wastes the taxpayers' money that's been put in. It props up inefficient businesses. It drives cronyism and corruption, but also creates this dependency so that firms are less likely to innovate, and also leaves the door open to more political interference as well. So in short, we shouldn't be stifling the free market or entrepreneurship and innovation in the European Union, quite the opposite. And to give the example of trade as well, sadly, trade barriers are being erected while at the same time potential trading partners for the European Union are being ignored and in some cases even antagonized. And it's a great pity and also a lost opportunity that the EU is not reaching out to global partners and recognizing this positive change. Instead, for example, the EU Green Deal in particular has become synonymous with protectionism and also intransigence. International trading partners are seeing their commodities and their goods being targeted by these barriers, and examples of the regulation on deforestation and also the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So the EU should really be sort of looking to leave this current isolationist path and engage with friendly democracies across the globe to strengthen trade and promote open markets. And in a world increasingly seen to be linked to polarization and fragmentation, it's important that the European Union sets the right example and acts as this open global trading partner as opposed to some kind of fortress Europe as well. And building this consensus would be more powerful and also sustainable over the longer term. And these concrete actions should include establishing this dialogue and engaging with countries in the regulatory but also the standards setting processes. And going further, this should also cover the recognition of the global norms and practices that exist, and underline that countries have different levels of responsibility in each of these objective areas. And just to say a few words on labour policy as well, we're seeing some very similar things in the sense that the EU has a very old-fashioned, almost 1950s view of the labour market, and failing to understand the role of digitalization, the needs for flexibility and the needs for choice within the marketplace. As we see more people in Europe moving away from the 9 to 5 and wanting more choice over when, where and how they earn money. Even conservative European Union figures show that there's already almost 40 million freelancers at the moment, and the vast majority don't want to be employed in a very old-fashioned way. Probably many of you want to have sort of a more project-based approach and not be stuck in a 9 to 5 and going to one place, selling hours to one employer, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And we're really getting this forced shift from kind of autonomous business models to rigid employment structures. And this would be something that would be really bad for innovation, terrible for independent talent, and also severely diminish the flexibility and freedom that is fundamental to why many people choose to be an entrepreneur, freelancing, platform work, and are looking for this kind of openness, flexibility, and choice, which is increasingly important. So just to finish off this short presentation, the von der Leyen Commission has been responsible for many expensive schemes and programs which do very little for economic growth, while at the same time hampering business with red tape, expensive rules, all in the name of sustainability and green goals, while demonizing business and legitimate trade. At the same time, the European Parliament has been backing up this stance and is acting more like an NGO than a true co-legislator. And as Europe sadly falls behind China and US in many areas, particularly innovation, competitiveness, and even growth in certain elements, it's time that we listened to the market and allowed more and more opportunity for free enterprise to flourish. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentation. I will now kindly ask Mr. Hannes Gissurarson, Professor Emeritus of Politics at the University of Iceland, with the topic of Does Morality Lie in Regulation?
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be here again in Croatia and see the attempts, successful attempts of Croatia really to build a prosperous and peaceful nation. I also come from a small country, Iceland, and we have great sympathy with the small countries of other small countries of Europe. But what I was asked to do was to discuss the morality of the free market. And if you just discuss it with your friends, then you see that you can, all of you, in business administration and elsewhere, you can usually give a rather good account of the merits of free trade. Because if I have an apple and you have an orange, and you want an apple and I want an orange, then we exchange and we are both better off. There is a very simple argument for free trade. The problem, the moral problem, is more, how do we come to have the property rights to the oranges and the apples? And some people have regarded this as the weak point in classical liberalism. Because they say, why is it that some people have much more than other people? How did they come to have that? And if you look at property rights, they are rights to exclude other people. They are rights to say, this is mine and you're not going to transgress on my garden. I have a fence around it. By what right do you take a part of the world from others and prohibit their use of it? This is a very interesting question, and the socialists say there is no such right. But John Locke, in his treatise on government, he actually pointed out that you may be able to expropriate from the commons under a proviso, which is that others are not worse off. And his argument was, others are not worse off, even if you take something from the commons, because once we do that, the whole will be much more protective. This was essentially John Locke's argument, and it was refined and strengthened by Robert Nozick in his brilliant Anarchy, State and Utopia in 1974. Now, David Hume, on the other hand, he said we don't really need the Lockean proviso. We only need the absence of legitimate counterclaims. So essentially, property should just be where it is, unless you can prove that it should be somewhere else. And he also had quite a good point, because he based his theory on convention. Whether we do agree with Locke or with Hume about the legitimacy of private property, I think that the argument for private property is very, very strong. And it is essentially twofold. One of them is about prosperity, the other one about peace. This is the first argument is of course very familiar because Aristotle used it in his critique of Plato's communism. It is that we take much better care of something that we own ourselves than we do of what other people own, or what we own in common. It becomes much more productive if we own it. Everybody's business is nobody's business. Nobody cares about things that are owned in common. And this is what we saw in all the communist countries in the period of the 20th century. There was a great social experiment, and it showed that the idea of common property totally failed. So the first argument for private property is the prosperity that it creates by encouraging people to cultivate and to improve upon the resources and the skills and abilities that they have. If you are yourself to enjoy the revenue from your abilities and your skills, you will do much more to reveal them and to develop them and to improve upon them than you would otherwise do. So this is the first argument. The second argument is about peace. If we divide up the resources of the earth so that you have one part of it and you have one part of it, then we're not going to fight over them. Good fences make good neighbors, is the old adage about it. So, and this is of course St. Thomas Aquinas' argument for private property. He has a very cogent argument for private property in Summa Theologica. But what is then the moral basis of the free market? Well, there are also two basic theories supporting the free market. One of them is the tradition of individual rights, natural rights that St. Thomas Aquinas presented. The other one is utilitarianism. I must confess that I am much more sympathetic to the natural rights tradition than to utilitarianism, even if I believe that the free market has great utility, and even if I believe that the selling point for the free market is the prosperity and the utility that it produces. But for me, what is sympathetic or attractive about the free market is the sacredness of individuals, their freedom to choose their careers and their lives. So we have those two. I believe actually there is a third, very interesting philosophy of the free society, which isn't really much discussed. It has been presented by the British philosopher Michael Oakeshott. And Michael Oakeshott, he rejects both really utilitarianism and the natural rights theory. He argues from identity. What he says is basically this: Western individuals have over the centuries, the millennia, developed the will and the ability to make choices. We have stepped out of the group that used to define us in the past. And he describes this as having taken place in the Italian Renaissance period. And I've sometimes said, who are the first individuals? I think it is Romeo and Juliet, because they refused to be Montague and Capulet, simply. They became themselves. They stepped out of their traditional family roles and became individuals. And Shakespeare, who was also, I think, a great individualist, he told their story. So I think that Michael Oakeshott says to us, why is it that we support a free society? It is not because it has so great utility, and not because we believe in natural rights. It is because it is ourselves. We look into the mirror and we are happy about what we see. We are Western individual people who have gained the ability and will to make choices for ourselves. We are individuals. We refuse to be mass men We refuse to be sheep that are driven by a shepherd to one place or another. So it is just a matter of our identity and not about utility, the defense of the free society. In a way, this is similar to what Hegel said about the course of history. He said that essentially you could divide history into three phases. One was when there was only one person who was in control, the despot. Then there was a period when there were many or a group in control, the oligarchs or the ruling elite. And then there was a third phase when everybody was free. First there was only one person free, the despot. Then there was only one group free, the elite. And then there was a period when everybody became free. And that was when the Weltgeist, the world spirit, had become conscious of herself, realized who she was. And this is precisely Michael Oakes's defense for the free society. We realize who we are. We realize that we are individuals. You guys, you want to establish companies where you can explore your entrepreneurship or make all kinds of other career choices because you're individuals and you relish the fact that you're able to make choices and live in a free society. Now then, it is rather interesting, what should we do about morality? I think St. Thomas Aquinas actually had a very good approach and much better than the British utilitarians of the 19th century. Who presented the harm principle and so on. Your limit to freedom is that you're not harming other people. It bogs the question, it becomes endless discussion about what is harm and what is not harm. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas had a different approach. He said, what is essential is the law and what the law should do. And we are all sinners. But the law has to limit itself. So the law should only pursue and prohibit those sins that are harmful to other people, like theft and murder and violence, and leave alone other sins. Not because they are not sins, they are recognized as sins, but, it isn't really the role of the lawgiver or the law enforcement agency to pursue them. So all kinds of immoral acts that do not harm other people should be left alone by the law. And I think this is an eminently sensible position because you recognize that they are sins, but you also recognize that we have to, as the lawgivers, to tolerate them in our society, especially because we are also fallible beings and we do not always know when we are right. So this is, in my opinion, where we should regulate. Now, if we discuss then economic regulation, I think we have overlooked what actually Eamonn Butler finished his talk here about, which is the self-regulation that spontaneously formed associations and societies and congregations and all kinds of civil society can perform. And I think one of the greatest tasks of the European Union in the future would be to try to reintroduce and revive the subsidiarity principle, namely to move decisions to the localities where the people are affected, so that those who are affected by a decision, they make the decision themselves and not the bureaucrats in Brussels. So I would vote for self-regulation instead of government regulation. But finally, I should perhaps say a few words about the nation, because I heartily agree that we have to protect and preserve the nation. The nation is a very valuable community, and we should make a distinction between economic integration and political integration. Economic integration means that we have a wide open market and we all can benefit from the division of labor that Adam Smith so convincingly discussed and described. But this doesn't mean that we should have political integration or centralization. That's a totally different thing. And paradoxically, economic integration facilitates political disintegration, or rather smaller political units, because if we have a very large European or international market, we can all enjoy the benefits of the market, but we can have our own little states without losing anything. So, and this is of course what has happened in the last 50 to 60 years. We have had a proliferation of states. There were about 50 states in 1950, and now there are about 200 states. And the reason for this is that we can all benefit from an international free market, from the division of labor. So I believe that there is something very valuable, something that gives us meaning in life in the nation. Because if you are students of economics and business administration, you must ask yourselves, what is it all about? Is it just about profit maximization, which is a wonderful thing? No, it isn't. What gives life meaning is that we have some aspirations and ideals. They are constrained by economic laws. But this is what gives life meaning. It is to have a family, to have the nation, to have friends, to have associations, and so on, in civil society. So I think it's very important for us not to neglect this part of the love of liberty. So what liberty can promise is, in my opinion, peace and prosperity.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And I will now kindly ask Professor Vedrana Pribićević from Zagreb School of Economics and Management to present us the topic of governments too can organize markets.
All right, so the title of my topic is, governments too can actually organize markets. And as a matter of fact, this is, I think, to markets, imitation is the highest form of flattery. And governments can organize markets because there will be two places where the average voter, what the average voter is going to care about. One is, of course, education, whether my kids are going to a good school. Because essentially, if you're born in a middle-class family or even lower-class family, that's a way out of poverty. And secondly, as we have an aging population, am I going to die prematurely because I do not have access to the best possible healthcare? And Europe is sort of, I think, lagging on both accounts, mainly because, unfortunately, and this is also the case in Croatia, somehow people think that the only way to get good education and to get good healthcare is if it's government provided, which is of course wrong. And we know this. Croatia, did you know that Croatia has some of the highest rates of premature death of people over the age of 40 in the world, right? We don't have a very good health system, despite it being nominally free, and despite it actually costing quite a lot. And for my students who will have their first salary, I urge them to look at the total cost of the employer and how much you're paying for healthcare that is not accessible and that is definitely not cheap. And this is going to be even a more growing problem as Europe actually ages, right? So what do I propose that we do? So we need a radical voucherization. So what are we interested in? We can use concepts for mechanism design, which is something we teach our students. This is called reverse game theory. In game theory, what I have is you kind of study the game and look at the outcomes. Here, I define what the outcomes are, and then I kind of define what the game is, right? So what am I interested in? I'm interested in, for instance, how to get people into treatment. How do we make waiting lists shorter? How do we get kids into good schools, etc., etc. And then we can define the game that leads to this. And of course, government, what better way to do this than to distribute vouchers? Because if I'm not very keen on, I try to lose weight, right? And, I am dieting constantly and using all sorts of drugs and Ozempic and this and that. But, the government is really not, there's a signal missing, right? Right? If I ever end up in heart surgery, which costs roughly around 100,000 kuna, which is around 30,000 euros, right? This is going to be paid by a host of other people who might, who have contributed to the health system, right? So there's no reason for me to ever care, really, whether I lose weight, whether I stop smoking, whether I eat healthy, whether I exercise, etc. But if I give people vouchers, they can do what? Well, they can go wherever they like, right? I could go to a private institution maybe to get treatment, and I carry this money, this tax money, I carry it to where I think it's best. Of course, we have tried to, and I'm sorry that Stjepo is not here. He's probably at the negotiations, but one of his ideas was that let's try this in the health sector, right? Let's give people vouchers and have them go places. And then the government was like, no, everybody would go to the private providers. And I'm asking them, why is this a problem? Well, people obviously know where they will get better treatment, right? And then they're like, no, but we will be siphoning money away, tax money away into private pockets. And I'm asking myself, well, guys, but people do not want to go to public hospitals because they don't get the right treatment there. So what's the problem? People are just choosing where to go with their own money. The same goes for education. Lithuania has done this in higher education with the voucherization of their public education at universities. Why? Well, since Lithuania entered the European Union 20 plus years ago, they lost roughly around 20% of population, all of these young. Why? Well, no reason to go to a public university where you can go and study anywhere in Europe at almost no cost. And then the Lithuanians were like, aha, we're also a very small nation. We're going extinct if young people are not staying here, right? They do not want to go to university here, they go abroad. What should we do? We should voucherize. Turns out they voucherized, and what happened is, surprise, surprise, our partner school, which is the ISM School of Management, which is private, is the best school in Lithuania. Why? Because before that, they had every reason to gather all of the best people, people with foreign PhDs, students from across the world, because they were private. But now, Lithuanian students have vouchers and they can go to a public school if they want with the voucher, they can go to a private school with a voucher if they like. And that's the only way how Croatia becomes a good destination to study in Europe. Croatia is safe, small, the weather is nice. Any exchange students here? Any exchange students? Yeah? Do you like it here? Very much? Yeah? Okay. How my students would say, the booze is cheap, right? It's important, right? And it's safe, wonderful. You can go to the seaside. Probably best place to study in Europe, you know. No reason for Croatian universities, especially one on the coast, to mimic the success of the likes of Barcelona as a place to study. Very nice. If you ever been to Pompeu Fabra, they have a very nice campus and you can overlook the beach. It's no better motive to study than, seeing the people who passed basking in the sun, right? But that's the only way how Croatia can have the young people stay here and study, and also have foreigners come to study to Croatia as well. Because the only way to actually have efficiency is to voucherize. Of course, ideally, we could do the same thing as US did, right? US has a private education, higher education system. It's the best in the world. Surprise, surprise, right? But, we would agree to a second best solution. And that is to simply give both patients and students a voucher and let them vote with their tax or their parents' tax money in hand. And we all know what the result will be. They will simply choose what's best for them, because that's what people, when you leave them to their, thinking, and they know what's best for them, right? Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks to all the presenters. I would kindly ask to start the panel right now. So I will ask Eamonn Butler, founding director of Adam Smith Institute, Glen Hodgson from Free Trade Europa, Hans Gissurarson, professor emeritus from Iceland, politics, and Vedrana to join me here for half an hour talk, right? I had a set of questions prepared, but I will now let them loose and talk about what you talked. A lot of interesting stuff. Since we have only half an hour, I would propose that we talk about at least 3 things and see where we go. So about regulation in pandemics and sustainability and AI. And the regulation in voucherization can always come as a topic here. So maybe starting from where we started with Mr. Eamonn Butler. So you talked a lot about restraining government and about the excuses that government often take for hardening the grip of the state. So, and how it is not giving it back after some security reason goes away and similar stuff. So what do you think are some possible future excuses that we could see in, let's say, next 5 years where free market could be in danger again?
I don't think there's any shortage of possible excuses. I mean, anything like movements of people because of wars or population disruptions of one sort or another, all sorts of internal problems such as difficulties in a particular market always seem to lead to politicians saying, well, we have to regulate that market. Whereas, in fact, the best policy is probably to introduce more competition, because competition is the best regulator. We have a number of regulators of our privatized services like gas, water, electricity, railways, and so on. And the first of those regulators to be created told me that competition is the best regulator. So he saw his job not as regulating, in this case, the telephone industry, but in order to introduce more competition into the industry. So there's no shortage of excuses, and politicians will be delighted to pounce on any excuse they can to expand their power, because as we all know, power is delightful and absolute power is absolutely delightful. So that's why we should stop people getting it.
Okay, thank you. So you also mentioned you have to define emergency. So Vedrana surely knows we had the COVID and we didn't define the emergency. Our government was changing the law so it doesn't have to go over to constitutional ways to limit the rights. And as we saw in the recent elections, it went unpunished. So what's the perspective there? Maybe question for all when you maybe have the people that are used to state taking care of them and not even having this sense of individualism we also heard about today. So maybe a question for everyone or feel free to comment on this. And I don't know if you are introduced to the ways and things that happened here in Croatia in 2020 and after regarding pandemics, but feel free to talk about your experiences.
I mean, this happened in so many countries. The only country I can think of that really escaped was Sweden. And Sweden recognized that during the pandemic, people were actually taking care of themselves. They weren't going to crowded places and so on. Whereas other governments, like ours in the UK, that was going on. People were indeed responding to the threat of the pandemic and behaving in a more cautious way, but nevertheless it locked down. And none of us thought that our government had that power. You know, we have a liberal democracy going back 1,000 years, and we didn't think that was feasible. And now we realize there is no limit to government. So that's why we really do need a high rule of law to limit these things.
Okay.
I think also within that, it's very interesting how quickly people were malleable in this process as well and towed the line without really too much protest. In Sweden, thankfully, we had sort of the idea that, and also I'd say something that in Sweden, given the public authorities, the real sort of faith put in individuals who are experts in the topics as opposed to politicians who just wanted to gain more power. And that element, so keeping the schools open, keeping the gyms open, these kind of things, restaurants, but this strange rule, but you can only have 5 people on a table. So there was some kind of madness along those lines as well, but it was much more sort of open. But unfortunately, the steps are in place, be it sort of migration, health, other issues for this to be sort of put in place again. So the blueprint is there, unfortunately. And I think something we need to be more aware of for the future and going forward in these things.
Anyone else, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the main problem here is that, you know, in Croatia, people were already so much used to the government babysitting them that this was unfortunately kind of, you know, Croatia had this sort of, because of the tourist season, had this different approach. We were kind of opening, closing, and then there were narratives of people who were actually scientists but were trying to gain political favor through, you know, advocating for hard lockdowns. But, you know, I mean, we have, people really do take care of themselves. If you look at data from South Korea, for instance, they had this sort of heat maps where you could report if you wanted where you were infected, anonymously, of course, and people looked at these maps and of course they did not go to the cinema. I mean, people are not stupid, you know, if they have average intelligence at least, they will not willingly infect themselves by, you know, behaving or misbehaving. So Croatia had a problem mostly because the government kind of tried to save the economy by giving money to the private sector to keep the level of employment high. The problem is once you give firms money, it's very hard to wean them off this. And I'm afraid that we have a lot of walking dead now, that there is a branch of companies that, because of declaring emergency, for instance, one of the things that we didn't do, the law for, the law that governs bankruptcies of companies was suspended during the pandemic and sometime afterwards. And now we have this huge bulk of walking dead companies, which are essentially due to go bankrupt, but they haven't because of the pandemic and because of government help. And this is a pressing issue, because every time the government touches into the market, it distorts something. And this is the reason why, we should be very, 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 very careful, very careful when advocating any form of government intervention. So in Croatia, in the business sector, the greatest, the fallout that is to follow is going to happen maybe earlier next year, when all of these companies, unfortunately, start to go.
I mean, even at the consumer level, as we see the fact that element of printing money and free money for a long time. Now we see the inflation levels. I mean, Estonia, what is it, 20%? Huge amounts. It's quite basic economic theory. Why is this happening now? Because it was cheap money and we've been printing it for a long time. But absolutely, I think this point here, there's a lot of companies. In Sweden, we have the example where there was this kind of VAT holiday for companies. And the same situation, a lot who were struggling. Now it's, well, we'd like them to pay that back, but a lot of these companies don't have the money to be able to do it. So what do? Do you write it off? What's the element here? So again, it's never a good way to do a wrong thing. It's either you can kick it down the road far enough, but it's going to bite you sooner or later.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I didn't even want to ask about inflation, since it's a topic for the later panel. No problem. But yes, today we are asking where the inflation got from, but and other bad probably trends that we see today in, I don't know, some psychological health and so on. That is probably, I would suppose to say, linked to something we did during COVID pandemics. But now, as in the aftermath, it's like it's forgotten, and we are still looking for why is something happening and so on. So, in the aftermath, do you see any, let's say, let's say, making it right after making government responsible for too much interfering into the market during some crisis in the last few years?
No, none.
Okay, so do we have a place? Do we have space for being optimistic here? At least for next possible events like this.
Well, I just wanted to add one point that nobody has mentioned here, which is that we shouldn't really accept the pandemic as something that fell out from the heavens and we just have to accept. It seems to me very likely that it was a lab leak in China. And why on earth did the Chinese government stop all investigation into it and keep everything hidden? It is they, I think, that are responsible for this. And what we have to do is to find out what happened so it is not being repeated. And we cannot tolerate really that China breaks all the rules of international cooperation so that we will have another pandemic at some other time.
So a question, maybe not so serious one. Have you ever been labeled as anti-vaxxer during COVID?
No, I've had lots. I've had about 5 vaccines.
I have been.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That's okay. So we can go back here. I will leave later a little time for public to ask. But a good way to go from this topic of pandemics in regulation and sustainability. So since you probably were labeled as anti-vaxxer, maybe you were labeled also as anti-climate change denier. So you talked about this a lack of strategy combined with too much regulation in European Union. Do you see any perspectives of being in the middle ground between some new Brexit and between blindly following the naive maybe stances and policies of European Union in terms of regulating market and sustainability?
Well, I actually think that one of the strongest cases for the free market is in terms of sustainability, pollution, and the waste of natural resources, because we have an excellent solution to almost all of it, and it is private property rights. Why is it that there is no danger of the sheep in Iceland becoming extinct, but there is a danger of the elephants in Africa becoming extinct? There is one simple answer. It is that the sheep in Iceland are owned. They have owners who are responsible for them and to guard them and to protect them, whereas the elephants in Africa are unowned. And the only way to preserve them is to establish private property rights to them. And actually this is happening in some parts of Africa. The same applies to the rhinos. And I have written 2 books about how we in Iceland solved the problem of the fish stocks, because they had been overexploited. If you have open access to a scarce resource, it will be overexploited. It's not sustainable. And what we did was to establish transferable property rights, in a way, fishing rights, and that took care of the problem. And now we in Iceland have the only productive and sustainable and profitable system of fisheries in Europe. All the other European countries have a heavy burden from their fisheries, being subsidized everywhere else. So sustainability is one of the strongest points of the free market, as well as poverty is. You know, there is no better machine to eliminate poverty than the free market.
I mean, I must say here that you know, I've been not labeled as a climate change denier, but as a climate change pessimist, because I believe that, you know, even if the Industrial Revolution did cause a climate change, there is nothing we can do about it. And what right do I have as a citizen of Croatia, you know, to enjoy a beautiful life here, you know, living relatively wealthy, and somebody else somewhere elsewhere in the world, you know, the regulation is stopping them from achieving the same level of comfort as I am. You know, who has the greater right to, you know, to be, you know, to enjoy a life and, you know, to prosper? Is it me? Is it the future generations? Is it somebody, you know, some child in Brazil that might suffer as we, you know, engage in a wide, you know, if we implement policies that are designed to curb climate change? I can tell you that most climatologists, at least the ones that are silent, think that really nothing can really be done to prevent this anymore, right?
I think we have a total different stance here and in the COVID. In the COVID it was, okay, we have to protect, we have to take lockdowns, and we have to protect the ones that are the first, like, that will surely be impacted, people that will die, and maybe future externalities, bad externalities of this lockdown will be bad. Here we have the opposite. Here we have people are dying, surely, because of this, from poverty, because of regulations, because of interventions and regulations in the market for sustainability that will save in the future maybe.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And this is the moral dilemma, right? Who has the greater moral right? Is it me, or is it my ancestor who's going to live here, or somebody who's currently alive in the many countries that are now exiting poverty? Well, Asia has exited poverty. South America, you know, is exiting poverty. Africa is exiting poverty, right? So the question is really, you know, and this is what most people who are for regulation, right, climate and ESG and all of this, when you ask them this question, they really don't know the answer. And that means they really haven't thought about this very much. from a multi-perspective.
Well, this point about who benefits is a very significant one. If you are allocating your resources through a government institution, who is it that controls that? Well, the answer is that it's extremely elderly people like myself and Hannes here. Because we actually go out and vote. And young people don't go out and vote because they're not very interested in government. So what happens is that resources are controlled by the older generation. And my son is always complaining to me that you baby boomers who came along after the Second World War, you've had it all your own way. You absorbed all these resources, you created yourself a free healthcare system and a free education system and all these welfare benefits for yourselves, and you expect the next generation to pick up the bill, which is exactly what's happened. And that is the immorality of government, that it doesn't actually put the responsibility into the hands of the person that's paying. On the contrary, it encourages people to take as much resource out as possible and try to pass the cost on to everybody else. That is immoral.
And especially when the pyramid scheme is going to collapse because of the fact there's fewer people being born. So the Ponzi scheme can only last so long. So yes.
So these guys aren't going to get state pension.
Yeah, don't think about retiring anyone in the audience today. Yeah.
Can I say just a few words about climate change? I think that we have to accept that the world has been warming, and it may well be that the IPCC has a lot to say, which is valuable. But we have to make two common sense observations about all of this. One is that it would be very strange if, for a mysterious reason that we have no plausible explanation for, that suddenly nature has ceased to cause any change in climate, when we have had nature causing immense changes in climate for the past millennia and millions of years. So why would nature just abdicate and leave the scene all at once? This is, for me, extremely implausible. So it has to be an intertwined process where some is man-made and the other is nature-made, and we have to find out which is which, and I have not seen any plausible way of explaining what is what in that. Then the second common sense observation that I think nobody can really doubt is it really so that in the last 2 decades of the 20th century, we mysteriously reached an optimal climate so that any change from that climate would be for the worse? For example, 1 or 2 degrees lower or 1 or 2 degrees higher. All such changes have positive and negative effects. And some of the positive effects of warming of 1 or 2 degrees is that the greener areas in the world, they will be actually more extensive. Agriculture will be much better. The Arctic regions will be inhabitable, and so on. The negative effects will be a rising sea level, and perhaps some species that have adapted well to present circumstances will die out. So there are negative and there are positive effects of a warming of 1 or 2 degrees predicted by the IPCC. But, I do not think that this should really lead us to any hysteria about climate change.
Thank you very much. This was really refreshing. I would ask for one round of applause for our guest.
Use this experience to fuel your aspirations. Be part of the change. Let's explore, learn, and grow together. Secure your spot now.